Northwestern Hawaiian Islands Ecosystem Protection Protocols. The following training session will prepare you for travel into the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands, where you come in contact with one of the most isolated and ecologically sensitive regions in the world. The ecosystem protection protocols you will learn in this presentation were established by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Hawaii Department of Land and Natural Resources, and are endorsed by the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands Marine National Monument. Ecosystem protection protocols are quarantine procedures and other ecological protection practices that help preserve and protect unique and pristine ecosystems. This presentation will demonstrate why we need ecosystem protection protocols when visiting remote islands and how to apply them. This training session will lead you step by step through protocols that are intended to reduce, if not eliminate, the threat of transporting unwanted plants and animals during packing and field operations. After you finish viewing this material, you will know why it's critically important that you do not introduce these organisms into the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands. When packing for a journey, we generally focus on what to take so that we're prepared in the field. But when traveling to remote areas like the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands, we also must consider the unseen hitchhikers we might unknowingly carry with our food, equipment, and supplies. There is a viable risk that any one of us might introduce a new organism to an area where it can become invasive and disrupt the local ecosystem. The ecosystem protection protocols are designed to mitigate this risk. Islands and atolls in the Pacific Ocean are some of the most biologically diverse regions on Earth, supporting unique plant and animal species. The recently established Northwestern Hawaiian Islands Marine National Monument is abundant with wildlife. At least 7,000 marine species, a quarter of which are endemic, are found within the monument. 8 islands and atolls within the monument provide some of the only intact and undisturbed breeding habitat for millions of seabirds that forage in the Pacific Ocean. 4 endangered land birds and 90% of the entire Laysan albatross population nest on these islands and atolls. The endemic Nihoa palm and 14 other plants and animals are listed as endangered and face the threat of extinction due to small numbers and limited habitat. More than 90% of the threatened Pacific green sea turtle population breeds at French frigate shoals. Spinner dolphins and critically endangered Hawaiian monk seals rest, breed, and forage within the 1,200-mile-long archipelago. And there are likely untold numbers of plants, animals, and microorganisms that have yet to be discovered. Clearly, there is a lot at stake here. Being aware of the region's biological sensitivity will help you appreciate and protect it, and protecting it requires understanding how you threaten it. Alien species are plants, animals, and microorganisms that occur outside their natural range due to human movement or actions. Without the natural controls found in their native habitats, the aliens can proliferate and radically change entire ecosystems in relatively short periods of time. Alien species are also called non-native or introduced species, but when they spread and cause harm, they're called invasive species. There is scientific consensus that alien species invasions are a major threat to biological diversity, especially in isolated island ecosystems. Humans visiting remote Pacific islands and atolls have accidentally and intentionally introduced numerous non-native plants and animals. And today, all of the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands have non-native species living on them. Some have caused considerable damage. The islands most altered are the ones where military installations were constructed, such as Midway Atoll, Kure Atoll, and French frigate shoals. Midway Atoll bears the burden of hundreds of alien species, including the emerald green beetle, mosquitoes, cockroaches, mice, spiders, wasps, ants, golden crownbeard, and ironwood trees. The introduction of invasive species is not limited to the terrestrial ecosystems of the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands. The marine ecosystems also are vulnerable. 11 alien species of algae, invertebrates, and fish have been recorded in the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands. The majority of alien marine species are marine invertebrates associated with the harbor at Midway Atoll. One of the established species, the blue-line snapper, spread from the main Hawaiian Islands to the northwestern Hawaiian Islands on its own. The other species, the hydroid Panaria disticha, was most likely transported on the hulls of ships. Alien marine plant and animal introductions are difficult to detect early, but once these organisms have a foothold, there is little hope for eradication. One of the most ecologically devastating introductions occurred in the early 1900s when rabbits were intentionally released on Laysan Island. Over a 20-year period, the rabbits consumed most of the island's vegetation, resulting in the extinction of the Laysan rail, Laysan honeycreeper, and the Laysan millerbird. Another disastrous introduction occurred on Midway and Kure atolls, where two species of rats decimated ground-nesting seabirds, causing the loss of entire seabird populations and the extinction of the Laysan rail. Rats have since been eradicated from both Midway and Kure atolls, but the threat of reintroduction persists as long as humans continue to visit the islands. Hawaii's native plants and animal populations have evolved in isolation without exposure to diseases found elsewhere in the world. Therefore, they have not developed an immunity to diseases such as avian pox. Avian pox is a virus transmitted by mosquitoes, flies, and ectoparasites. Infected albatross chicks develop severe lesions on their faces and bills. It's unknown how the virus affects the long-term survival of these chicks. Other potential sources of disease for seabirds are poultry farms and other bird colonies that humans visit prior to visiting the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. Humans have the potential to introduce diseases to seabird colonies by transporting infected material on their shoes. Shoes worn in other seabird colonies should never be worn in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. We cannot afford a disease outbreak in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, where there are some of the world's largest seabird populations. Animals in the phylum Arthropoda include insects, arachnids, centipedes, and crustaceans. Of all the arthropods, ants are one of the most destructive species when introduced to areas where they are not native. They have been aptly called ecosystem busters. Several species of ants have been introduced to the northwestern Hawaiian Islands and are causing considerable damage to the native flora and fauna. For example, on Kure Atoll, researchers have documented newly hatched seabird chicks being eaten alive by big-headed ants. Some species of ants found in the main Hawaiian Islands are not found in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, but if they were introduced, they could cause ecological damage that rivals the destruction caused by rats and rabbits. For example, long-legged ants found on the offshore islands of Oahu have caused entire colonies of wedge-tailed shearwaters to abandon their nest sites. There have been many invasive plants introduced to the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. Some of them have displaced entire native ecosystems. On Midway Atoll, just a few ironwood trees planted 100 years ago have grown into dense ironwood forests, where sandy dune communities of native vegetation once existed. Ironwood groves are unacceptable nesting habitat for frigate birds and red-footed boobies, who prefer native naupaka bushes for nesting. It may seem strange to think that trees can kill seabirds, but seabirds are not accustomed to the tall, unforgiving ironwood trees on Midway and Kure Atoll. Occasionally, a bird will simply fly into a treetop, or two birds will collide in mid-air. The falling birds plummet into the stiff branches and become entangled. Some hang in the trees for days before dying. Golden crownbeard, or Verbicina enceloides, has proven to be one of the most invasive weeds ever introduced to the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. Verbicina was accidentally introduced first to Midway and then to Kure Atoll by the U.S. Navy more than a half a century ago. Recently, Verbicina was again, unintentionally, introduced to Pearl and Hermes Reef from Midway Atoll, where it's having the same devastating impact on Southeast Island. Verbicina is an aggressive, tall weed that displaces low-growing native vegetation that albatross and other seabirds prefer for nesting. Despite the altered habitat, albatross return to their historic nesting area, where both adults and chicks are subjected to heat stress caused by the hot, windless habitat under the 6-foot-tall weeds. Heat stress is one of the major killers of young seabirds. In the summer, when albatross chicks leave their nest to fledge, they're forced to wander through a labyrinth of Verbicina in search of open, windy areas where they can run and take off. Other seabirds are affected by the annual cycle of Verbicina. Christmas shearwaters nest under the plants when the foliage is robust, but when the plant ends its cycle or dies back during dry periods, it leaves vulnerable chicks unprotected against the hot summer sun. While the removal of Verbicina is a high priority, eradication has not been possible because of limited funding and logistical problems due to the remoteness of the islands. Countless other weeds could be just as disastrous as Verbicina if they were introduced to the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. A sobering example of the catastrophic impact a single introduction of a non-native insect can have on an ecosystem began to unfold on Nihoa Island in 2004. Grasshoppers were first observed there in 1984, but entomologists didn't express concern until 2002, when the grasshopper population began increasing. 2 years later, it had increased enough to defoliate most of Nihoa. It's impossible to know how grasshoppers arrived on Nihoa. They could have flown on their own or caught a ride on a ship. There's an important lesson to be learned from this tragedy. If you're aboard a ship in the waters around the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, you could potentially introduce non-native terrestrial and aquatic species to the islands and atolls. The ocean surrounding the island is not a barrier for swimming rats and insects and seeds that fly or float. Government programs designed to eradicate alien species are expensive and labor-intensive. For example, the U.S. Navy and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service spent $1 million eradicating the black rat from Midway Atoll. The service has also worked for over 10 years exterminating the common sandbur from Laysan Island. Hawaii Department of Land and Natural Resources and the United States Department of Agriculture worked together for 5 years and spent tens of thousands of dollars eradicating Polynesian rats from Kure Atoll. Ecosystem protection protocols may cost you some extra time and money, but the inconvenience is a small price to pay for the assurance that you won't introduce an invasive species that could cost millions of dollars to eradicate. So far, we've covered the reasons why ecosystem protection protocols are important. The next part of this presentation will describe the protocols themselves. The personal responsibility you take for following the protocols is key to protecting pristine areas. Without the cooperation of every single visitor, the potential for devastating alien introductions will persist. Ecosystem protection protocols. The specific ecosystem protection protocols you follow depend on where you're going. 2 levels of protection have been identified. Level 1 protocols are required for Nihoa, Mokumanamana, Laysan, Lisiansky, Pearl and Hermes Reef, and Kure Atoll. Level 1 ecosystem protection protocols are intended to protect largely pristine ecosystems as well as compromised ecosystems that are being restored. They call for the most stringent rules and the highest level of preventative action. Level 2 protocols apply to Midway Atoll and French Frigate Shoals, where high numbers of alien species have already been established. Protocols for these areas are intended to be more practical and therefore less stringent. There is, however, a concern that all visitors have the potential for introducing a new species, so you're always encouraged to employ Level 1 protocols when possible. Searching for stowaways. Everyone visiting the northwestern Hawaiian Islands is required to be on the lookout for plant and animal hitchhikers and dispose of them when they are found. The first line of defense against the introduction of alien species is visual inspection. Carefully inspect everything you transport. Plants, animals, and microorganisms have developed morphological and behavioral characteristics that take advantage of pathways for dispersal. Learning about plant and animal behavior and dispersal modes will help you find unwanted stowaways and prevent them from contaminating your equipment, food, field gear, and supplies. plant and animal dispersal modes. Tiny seeds and insects are difficult to see. Camouflage is a very effective mode that plants and animals use to avoid predators. Some plants and animals can fragment and grow into new individuals from pieces of the parent organism. There are at least 2 alien species of algae in Hawaii that can reproduce from a fragment of less than 1 centimeter. Attachment designs such as the Velcro-like hooks on sandburr seeds can attach to just about anything they touch. Aerodynamically shaped seeds and insects use the wind to disperse. Verbicina seeds have wing-like protrusions that help them spread in the wind. Hydrodynamically shaped phytoplankton, zooplankton, and fragments of some plants and animals use currents as dispersal modes. Nocturnal behavior of animals such as cockroaches and rodents protects them from being seen by daytime predators. Cement-like substances secreted by marine plants and animals such as barnacles and corals allow them to securely attach themselves to natural substrate, vessel hulls, and marine debris. As you can see, plants and animals have very effective dispersal modes. No matter how vigilant and observant you are, you can still overlook stowaways, especially organisms that can only be seen with a microscope. No single technique is 100% effective. The best management approach is to use multiple techniques to help ensure that your field gear, food, equipment, and supplies are not contaminated. In the next section, you'll learn the different techniques for decontaminating everything you pack. Those items include the following. Clothing includes all apparel, shoes, socks, and undergarments. Field gear includes all soft gear, such as day packs, fanny packs, camera bags, binocular straps, eyeglass straps, bedding, cots, tents, luggage, and any fabric or foam capable of harboring seeds and insects. Office supplies include books, data sheets, paper hole punchers, and pencil sharpeners. Other supplies include toilet paper, paper towels, sponges, and scrub pads. Equipment includes electronics, survey equipment, tools, collecting bags, gear bags, goodie bags, bird nets, and weighing bags. Scuba gear includes fins, masks, snorkels, gloves, booties, wetsuits, buoyancy compensators, weight belts, regulators, air tanks, dive computers, and any other equipment used while snorkeling and diving. Techniques for controlling and preventing alien species infestations. Heating your clothing, field gear, equipment, and supplies effectively kills many animals, plants, and microorganisms, but not seeds. Hot dryers can be used to help decontaminate clothing. Steam cleaners may also be useful when other techniques are not feasible. Freezing field gear, equipment, and supplies can effectively kill most arthropods, reptiles, and mammals, but will not destroy most seeds. Freezing items for at least 48 hours is usually sufficient, but if your materials are infested, a 12-day freezing regime is recommended to kill all life stages of the pests, including the eggs. Washing clothes and gear in hot water with detergent and/or bleach solutions will kill most insects, bacteria, viruses, algae, molds, and fungi, but not seeds. Bleach is also a very effective means of killing flora and fauna. Soak appropriate items for 1 hour in a 10% bleach solution. A stronger solution of bleach can be used to wipe down surfaces contaminated with mold and fungi. Insecticides will kill most arthropods, but not all life stages, such as eggs. Techniques to fumigate using insecticides will be covered later. Purchasing new clothes and field gear is a good method for reducing the risk of transporting alien species, but even this is not 100% effective. New items can be contaminated while they're being manufactured, shipped, or sitting on store shelves. Packing container types required for Level 1 areas. First, a word about the type of baggage or container you should use for packing. You're going into a marine environment. It's wet and the salt air is corrosive. Cameras, computers, and other sensitive electronic equipment should be packed in waterproof containers, such as Pelican cases. Larger items can be packed into action packers, pallet tubs, Pelican cases, and dry bags. Keep in mind that heavy or large cumbersome baggage should be avoided whenever possible, as these can cause injury, especially when transferring containers between vessels and shore. You may be involved in the loading and unloading of hundreds of buckets, so it's a good rule of thumb to limit bucket weight to between 20 and 25 pounds. Make it easy for yourself and others by packing light. Packing containers should be clean and have smooth surfaces. Some containers are not allowed because they harbor seeds and animals. Here's a list of the types of containers that are prohibited. Cardboard boxes, paper bags, bare wood containers, woven baskets made of plant material. Acceptable containers. The standard packing container for most supplies, food, gear, and equipment used in the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands is the plastic 5-gallon bucket with a resealable plastic lid. Be sure the lid has a rubber gasket so it will seal tightly. It's not glamorous, but it's pretty much waterproof, stackable, not too heavy when fully packed, and easily transported. It also makes a good camp chair. There are many types of acceptable plastic packing containers. They include action packers, Pelican cases, new garbage cans with lockable lids, dry bags, plastic bags, Tupperware containers, and pallet tubs. Metal containers with sealable lids such as ammo boxes. Wooden boxes should be well constructed so the joints are tight. Spaces between joints and holes in the wood provide hiding places for insects and seeds. The box should be painted or coated with varnish or resin. All wood products should be frozen for at least 48 hours prior to departure. Preparing the packing area. Required protocols for Level 1 and recommended for Level 2. These protocols are preventative actions that will lessen the chance of contamination while you pack. Remove seeding plants from around the packing area. Seeds can be blown or tracked into the packing area. The night before you pack, set off an insecticide fumigant in the packing room. Spray insecticides around entryways and in areas that open into your work area. Sweep, vacuum, and mop the packing area. Keep pests and other animals out of the area. Domesticated animals can carry insects and seeds in their fur. The packing area should be rodent-free. Trap or bait if necessary. Continuously monitor the area while packing. Seeds can be blown or tracked into the area. Pests can quickly reinfest packing areas. Avoid using couches, carpeting, and beds as packing surfaces, but if they must be used, cover them with clean sheets or plastic. Packing instructions required for Level 1 areas. Do not leave cases or containers open or unattended during packing. Wear clean shoes or shoe covers and clean clothes during packing. Unfold and visually inspect all clothing prior to placement in containers. Be sure to check the pockets and seams. Breakable items should be packed in new paper towels, new paper, new bubble wrap, or new cloth. Remove cardboard and paper packing from food and new gear. Save labeling and cooking instructions. Pack into two main categories: items that can be frozen and items that cannot be frozen. Clearly label the containers on the outside or use a system of colored flags to distinguish packing categories for easy identification later. Labeling can be done with a grease pencil on the container or with a permanent marker on duct tape. Pertinent information should include your name or initials, if the container can be frozen or not, and a brief description of contents. A numbering system on the buckets and other containers is also helpful. Another important consideration for labeling is whether the contents of the container are sun or heat sensitive. Sun and heat-sensitive items include many medicines, film, and some foods. A properly labeled container can be identified and moved immediately into the shade when offloaded. Make a list of items packed in each container. An inventory will help you keep track of your belongings. Pack all of the essentials you'll need during the voyage in 1 or 2 containers. The rest of your bags may be inaccessible in a storage container for the duration of the trip. New clothing and field gear or island-specific clothing and field gear. Required protocols for Level 1 areas. New clothing and field gear are required for everyone visiting Level 1 areas. New means the item has never been used and was recently purchased. State and federal agencies may use island-specific clothing and field gear. Those are items that were originally new and then used on one specific island over multiple field seasons. They can be cleaned and stored outside the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands Marine National Monument during off-seasons. They must be washed, dried, and stored in clean quarantine areas that are free of plants and animals. Once the items are washed and dried, they should be stored in airtight containers. Freezing instructions, required protocols for Level 1 areas. Freeze all materials for at least 48 hours. This includes freezing the bulk of your food, new and island-specific clothing, office supplies, equipment, field gear, and building supplies. Do not freeze glass or canned goods with liquid in them because they will explode in the process. The most efficient way to freeze items is to pack everything and deliver it to a commercial cold storage business at least 48 hours before you leave. Once frozen, refrain from reopening the containers in an uncontrolled environment. With items that cannot be frozen, like electronics, appliances, and propane tanks, a careful visual inspection is critical to verify the absence of plant or animal stowaways. Chemical fumigation is necessary if infestations are found or suspected. Fresh fruits and vegetables are prohibited. Required protocols for Level 1 areas. Prohibiting fresh fruits and vegetables helps prevent the inadvertent introduction of the food plants themselves and pests that hitchhike on them. Frozen, dried, and canned fruits and vegetables are acceptable alternatives. Seeds and dried beans. Seeds are common food items that could germinate and spread if released into the environment. Field workers will often sprout lentils and mung beans in field camps. These seeds have been identified as ones that cannot establish themselves in the islands. Strictly prohibited seeds. Tomato seeds. Tomatoes are prohibited. The seeds are passed whole through our digestive system. Therefore, you should not eat tomatoes 12 hours before landing. Raw sunflower seeds are prohibited, but baked or fried seeds are acceptable. Check the contents of trail mix for raw sunflower seeds. Plants in the sunflower family grow well in sandy soils. The invasive Verbicina plant, now thriving on Midway and Kure atolls and Pearl and Hermes Reef, is in the sunflower family. Alfalfa and watercress seeds are prohibited because they could become established. Mustard seeds also are prohibited. Large areas of Eastern Island on Midway are already covered with the highly invasive mustard plants. The list of seeds only includes those we know could become established, but certainly there could be others not yet identified. Ecosystem protection protocols for field operations. Field methods for preventing the spread of established alien species. On islands where alien introductions have already occurred, it's important to prevent further spread of alien species. Check your clothes and gear several times a day for alien seeds and insects. Humans can easily spread the invasive grass sandbur because the seeds have hooks that attach to clothing. Seal these hitchhikers in plastic bags, burn them, or dispose of them in secure containers back at camp. At Pearl and Hermes Reef, Verbicina has heavily infested Southeast Island, but is not found on the other islets within the atoll. Special measures must be taken to prevent Verbicina from spreading to these islets. Every person should have one set of quarantine gear and clothing for Southeast Island and another set of quarantine gear and clothing for all other islets in the atoll. Anything used at Southeast Island needs to stay off all other islets. Carefully inspect small boats and their associated equipment when traveling between islets. Anchors and anchor lines are potential sources for seed dispersal. For islands with sandy landing conditions, keep shoes and socks inside quarantine containers until reaching the island. Go ashore barefoot and then don the quarantine footwear. If landing conditions are unsafe for bare feet, quarantine shoes may be donned before going ashore. Fumigating in the field. It's also important not to contaminate your transport vessel back to Honolulu, so before leaving the island, fumigate your field gear. To do this, stage all gear on a large tarp in a sandy area of the island. Open all pallet tubs and generator boxes so fumigant gases can come in contact with items inside the boxes. Do not fumigate food. Cover the gear with a tarp. Place the fumigant strategically inside the tarp so the gases flow over the gear. Set off the fumigant and finish securing the edges of the tarp to the ground. Landing on multiple islands. Midway Atoll is often visited before sailing on to Kure Atoll and Pearl and Hermes Reef. Midway has many introduced species such as mice, mosquitoes, cockroaches, termites, fire ants, and the emerald green beetle that are not found anywhere else in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. Flying termites, cockroaches, and the emerald green beetle are particularly easy to transport. Do not leave camera bags, backpacks, buckets, or other containers open or unattended while on Midway. If contamination occurs, clean, freeze, or fumigate the items. Food purchased on Midway should be frozen and carefully inspected before being transported to other islands. All crew members and passengers should carefully inspect the transport vessel and tenders for hitchhikers after departing Midway. Some invasive insects and seeds found on Midway are not found in the main Hawaiian Islands, so if you're flying to Honolulu from Midway, check your baggage carefully for unwanted passengers. The emerald green beetle is a serious pest at Midway Atoll, and if introduced to the main Hawaiian Islands, would be devastating to agriculture as well as native ecosystems. Day visits to all islands. If you plan to make day visits to Nihoa, Mokumanamana, Pearl and Hermes Reef, Lisiansky Island, Laysan Island, or Kure Atoll, you'll need a separate set of new clothes, shoes, and soft gear for each island you visit. Even if you're only visiting an island for a few hours, you must follow Level 1 ecosystem protection protocols. Keep quarantine clothes isolated from clothes and field gear to be used on other islands by placing each set in new airtight bags. A typical set of quarantine clothing for a day visit would include a hat, sandals, shorts, long-sleeve shirt, short-sleeve shirt, underwear, towel, and backpack. There's usually freezer space on ships where you can freeze your clothes for 48 hours before use. Or they can be frozen before you board the ship. A complete extra set of quarantine clothes is a good idea, even if you're not planning a trip ashore, just in case an opportunity or need arises. The ship and the small vessels that ferry between ship and shore may be a source for alien species. Non-quarantine shoes and foul weather gear should be left in buckets at the high tide line once you land. On the rocky shores of Mokumanamana and Nihoa, quarantine shoes should be donned while still inside the small boat that ferries you ashore. Make sure that any seeds and insects that may be in the boat with you do not hitch a ride onto the island. Quarantine clothes worn on any of the Level 1 islands can be worn again on Kure, but once the item has been used on Kure, it can never be used on the other Level 1 islands. This is because Kure has many introduced species that are not found on the other Level 1 islands. Kure Atoll has a limited supply of quarantine clothes, shoes, and backpacks that are available for day visitors. Advise the island manager if you need these items before you go ashore. Ecosystem protection protocols for Level 2 areas. Because of the high volume of people visiting and living year-round on Midway Atoll and French Frigate Shoals, it's not practical or economically feasible to enforce Level 1 protocols in these areas at this time. Managers of these islands, however, strongly encourage visitors to help protect against alien species introductions. By voluntarily employing Level 1 ecosystem protection protocols, you will assist and support ongoing efforts to reduce invasive introductions. In one such effort, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is developing ecosystem protection protocols for barges that service Midway Atoll and visiting cruise ships and sailboats. The following Level 2 protocols are the minimum effort required to protect Midway Atoll and French frigate shoals from further alien introductions. Cardboard boxes are allowed but should be carefully inspected for unwanted insects and seeds. If infestations are found, the boxes should not be used. New clothes, shoes, and field gear are not required, but carefully inspect and clean used clothes, shoes, and field gear for seeds and pests. Be sure to inspect all pockets, linings, and seams. Contaminated clothes, shoes, and field gear should not be used. Freezing and fumigating are not required, but are encouraged, especially when a known threat exists. Do not pack footwear that has been worn on poultry farms or in other seabird colonies. If you have visited Kure Atoll, Midway Atoll, or Pearl and Hermes Reef, you might be harboring verbicina seeds or other alien species. You should not use clothes worn in these areas at French frigate shoals. Marine Ecosystem Protection Protocols. Ecological protection does not stop at the water's edge. Precautions also need to be taken to protect coral reef ecosystems. Over 300 alien marine species of plants and animals have been introduced into the waters of the main Hawaiian Islands. We know of only 11 marine species that have been introduced into the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. Pathways for marine introductions include vessel hull fouling, bait wells, ballast water discharge, anchors, scuba, and snorkeling gear. The invasive algae Gracilaria salicornia is a good example of how devastating a single introduction of alien algae can be to a coral reef ecosystem. Gracilaria was introduced to Hawaii in 1971 as an aquaculture species and has since overgrown large reef areas around Oahu. Gracilaria removal projects, including collections by scuba divers and suction barges, have removed hundreds of tons of this invasive species from Waikiki Beach and Kaneohe Bay. Unfortunately, this alga's ability to propagate from small fragments probably means that eradication of the species will never be possible. Marine ecosystem protection protocols should be followed any time small vessels, equipment, and dive gear are being transported from the main Hawaiian Islands to the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. When small vessels and gear have been used at Midway Atoll, Kure Atoll, and French frigate shoals, it may be necessary to repeat procedures to ensure that aquatic and terrestrial alien organisms are not transported to the more pristine northwestern Hawaiian Islands. Coral diseases have been identified at French frigate shoals, and their rapid spread through colonies of Acropora coral have been a concern. Additional protocols may need to be instituted to ensure that disease does not spread to healthy reefs or other islands. Procedures for decontaminating dive gear and scientific equipment. Prior to your departure to the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, visually inspect all snorkel and scuba gear, cameras, and scientific equipment for aquatic and terrestrial organisms. Dispose of any plant or animal material that is found. Soak all snorkel and scuba gear, cameras, and scientific equipment in a 10% bleach solution for 1 hour. Unzip and open all pockets in wetsuits, buoyancy compensators, and dive bags before soaking. Equipment used for sampling or monitoring should be soaked for 24 hours in a 10% bleach solution. Gear such as wetsuits can be dried on clotheslines in quarantine areas or areas where there is no threat of recontamination. Procedures for decontaminating tenders and dive boats. Visually inspect small vessels for algal remnants and other alien species, including terrestrial species. Wash the vessel hull, engines, and propellers with a 10% bleach solution. Carefully clean splash wells, anchor wells, and sumps to be sure they're free of algal remnants and sediments. Drain and dry the vessel. If the vessel has drainage plugs for enclosed hulls or anchor wells, tilt the vessel adequately to drain these areas. All boating equipment such as anchors, boat hooks, oars, life vest, boat cushions, fenders, and lines should be washed and soaked in a 10% bleach solution. Life vests, boat cushions, and lines are difficult to submerge. An alternative method is to wash them and then freeze them for 48 hours or fumigate them for 12 hours. Vessels should be fumigated just before being transported to the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands. This can be accomplished easily by covering the vessel, trailer, and engines with a tarp or large plastic sheet. The edges of the covering should be secured to the ground. Use 2 cans of fumigant, one under the boat and one inside the boat. Close off the opening. Leave the vessel covered for 12 hours. Vessels moving between Northwestern Hawaiian Islands. These protocols are intended to prevent disease and alien species from being transferred between islands. Soak snorkel and scuba gear in a 10% bleach solution. Soak sampling equipment for 24 hours in a 10% bleach solution. Vessels docked at Midway Atoll for extended periods of time will begin to foul. The hull should be cleaned before traveling to other Northwestern Hawaiian Islands. Few people visit the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands, but over the decades they've still managed to introduce damaging invasive plants and animals. Some of the damage has been corrected, but necessary mitigation efforts continue. Without the cooperation of every single person who visits these special places, the potential for devastating introductions persists. The personal responsibility you take for following the ecological protection protocols is an essential key to protecting pristine areas. These protocols may seem time-consuming and expensive, but they're a small price to pay for ensuring that biological diversity remains intact after you leave.